Hey, today we're going to look at adding in some details and features to our game controller models. So right now, mine's at the point where I've just got the form, like a solid body, as a form, and I've got a non-planar surface to split it up. However, we're going to look at a couple little things right now. So we're going to look at adding in some buttons, and yes, this is just modeled off kind of like a Nintendo 64 controller where it's wacky and it's three handles and was amazing. So some of the things we've seen in other controllers, like the PlayStation controller, it has a very strong round profile here, which is dead flat for a D-pad or directional pad, something like that. So what we want to do is look at ways of bringing that in. If we want a flat directional pad or something like an odd shape. But we need a flat surface to bring up buttons onto. So that's going to make it easier to model up our buttons anyway for now. So, we could do this as a free form, or we could just do something quite simple and, sketch it up, control it. So even if I just go to do a slot, something like this, and then we want to cut or extrude and position this and join it to the main body. So we can make it quite thick because we've got heaps of real estate to work with here. So we can go something like that. Doesn't really matter. New body, and then it's just about positioning it in place. So we can just select it, push it to somewhere where we like, and you can play around with these to just get the right type of settings you want. It doesn't really have the great control that we see in all the freeform selections, but you can change the actual pivot points and stuff as well by coming in, and if you select like an edge, it will allow you to rotate it across that edge. Once you tick done, then you can rotate it across that edge. And we just want to get it to a point where some of it's sticking out, and we just have a flat surface to work with. Oops. So something like that. Yeah, that should do quite nicely. So we hit OK, and we can see that this is our surface. Maybe it would be slightly rounded, like across the face, but it doesn't really matter for this sort of application right now. So what we have to do is just combine it with our main body. Select both of them, operation join. We don't need to keep the tool, and it goes and joins them together. Then we just want to probably blend it in with a fillet. With Fusion, fortunately, we can get away with doing like a large fillet that goes all the way to the edge. Playing around between tangent and curvature can give you some different results, but curvature generally doesn't like going past the edge. So we can do something like that, and I don't know if it'll let us run one on the top as well. Yeah, see, that's obviously not what you want. Okay, so something like 0.5, that comes up looking quite clean. Yeah, ideally this would have some slight curvature to match what the controller's doing there, but again, in this case it doesn't really matter, because it looks weird anyway, and I probably wouldn't go with that shape on a final design. So that's what allows us to have a flat base. We went over this briefly, talking about adding in the same sort of thing for joysticks as well. To just quickly put one of those in. You can do it with freeforms. You can do it by, you don't even have to sketch something like this. You can literally go create cylinder or sphere. So if we create a cylinder, I don't know, wherever thumbs end up on this thing, however big it is. And then it's the same process of moving it roughly into some sort of position. Maybe we'll tilt it out that way a bit. Have it protrude more, because then you can do something like you can dome this significantly, and it looks a bit small, so we can just go back in, edit, change the diameter like 30, and then it's sticking out the bottom there, so we're just going to adjust that so it's sitting completely within it. Do that, it's nice and domed. The angle's not quite right, again, does not matter. Modify, combine, join the bodies together, and just run a little fillet on there, maybe 4, that's probably a bit big, maybe 2. So we've got something where it's blended in and it gives us a nice base to work off. I think the really good thing about something flat is that you can sketch on it, because we've made it using solid modeling and the surfaces are planar, so we get all the control we would want when it's, you know, in terms of just sketching. Otherwise you've got to get a plane on there, which might be flat, might be pretty flat, again not really a big problem, but for ease of use pretty happy to go with this way. So yeah, that was just a brief little thing on that. What I want to go into is how how I go about splitting up a surface. So generally at this point what we want to do is have our material thickness sorted. So right now it's completely solid, which is good because we want it to be solid when we're adding in these bits. So then when we shell it, that it follows up along these contours. Otherwise we get weird geometry hanging out in the middle of this thing. Alright, sorry about that, I just had to pause and start the recording. I was having issues with the fillets I had put in around here and here. They didn't want to shell properly, so I've just disabled them, or deleted them completely for the moment. And I'll re-add them in later. It shouldn't matter. So like right now where we've got it shelled already, we can see it follows this inside contour. It's not going to really make a big difference if we then go and fillet something like this after the fact. But sometimes the actual shell command does not like shelling small fillets. So what you might end up with is something like this, and you can just round that inside bit later, but it's not really a big deal. So anyway, moving on from that. Now that's shelled, we always want to do our shell after we've joined our geometry. So yeah, we don't get those weird inside shapes. And we want to now find a way to split this surface into 2. And we've got our mad non-planar surface. This is quite a complex form. There's some areas which may not be perfect on it, but if we go to edit our form, hide that main body, we can see that it's pretty consistent. You can go through and do things like make uniform, where sometimes it evens it out a bit more when you move it back and forth. I applied it before, so there's not really any change there. You can also use the smooth command, which does smooth out some areas just a bit. So if this area wasn't doing exactly what I wanted it to, and I was just trying to blend them, see, we can turn that on and it smooths it out quite nicely. Where we have this, it's a little sharper here, and just bring that across blends it up quite neat. You could do that in a lot of areas, like especially down the front it can start to be a problem towards the handles, because you generally want a very smooth transition around here on these faces. And if we can do that, we can see it's just smoothing them out, and that's really up to you if you want to go about that or not. Sometimes it can do things you don't want it to do, and smooth it like badly. So it doesn't have to be smooth in some areas. Sometimes you need a bit of a sharper transition, but that doesn't really matter because we can look at that in a minute as well. But I mean, that seems fine. So we want to go about splitting this up. The easy and very basic way to do it is to just go split body, so select the body to split, so obviously the game controller that is shelled out, and then we select the splitting body. We don't need to extend because we've made sure it goes all the way through. We run through that and we get 2 halves of this controller. The problem is there's no real way these are locking together. We want it's called like a lip and groove, or in woodworking like a tongue and groove joint, and it's when one area sticks up and the other sits within it a bit. So I want to go through the process of how I do that. Dustin's got a pretty cool way of doing it too, but well, let's go with my way for now. And what we're going to do is offset our surface inwards till we get a middle plane, and then work around that center section. So what we need to do is, if we know the whole thing here is 1.8 thick, if we're going to split this in the middle, we need to offset the whole thing by -0.9. And it might not like doing it because, okay, so right there, that's selected faces. So what we just want to do is, we can't really select the whole body because it's not sort of tangentially smooth. So we can actually go back, because these won't affect our split in the future. So we can go back, way back, before we actually added any geometry to it, and throw in our offset here. So really take advantage of the fact that you can roll your timeline back and forward. So I'm just going to put that 0.9. Because it's such a complex shape, Fusion is going to look like it's crashing every single time I do stuff, which is fine. That's just part of it. So almost there. And there we go. All right, so that's fixed up. So now when I roll it forward, we can see that allow it to calculate the rolling forward, because then it has to redo that split for some reason, that shelling operation. All right, so if we turn on our analysis, we can see that there is a surface that is exactly halfway between these, which is great. It's what we want. And what we need to do now is create a way to make sort of like a zigzag pattern or zigzag shape in order to split our surfaces with it. And it's going to make a lot more sense when you actually see what starts to happen. So, all right, so I had some issues with Fusion crashing again. So we're just going to do it again, offset. And what I'll do is offset it 1 mil this way and 1 mil in the opposite direction. It'll let me select it nice and easily. So 1 mil and -1 mil. And this is going to allow us to split up our inside section and create a nice shape that we can then split our body with. So I'm just going to actually remove this one because we won't need it anymore. And now we want to start splitting these against each other, so you can pretty easily just use surface trim. And we want to get rid of the inside of the outside of that one and the inside of the other one. Sometimes it doesn't select through nicely. Let's just hide that. Yeah, okay, so it didn't really like selecting through it. That's okay. We'll just do it in another feature. So from here, what we can do is trim using this, trim away the bottom. Now we can grab that, trim away the inside of this, and grabbing the inside of our first offset and trimming away the top of the controller. This freaked out and crashed Fusion just before. I don't know why. Sometimes it just likes doing that and not figuring out how the surfaces work. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. Then the thing is, we have 3 bodies here and they're all separate. So what we have to do is stitch them together. In SolidWorks we would call it a knit, but we're in Fusion, so we call it a stitch. As long as our tolerances are high enough and we see green, we're all good. And what that does is brings it all into one body. So now if we show our, let's roll forward a bit to where it's actually shelled out. If we show our shell with our analysis, we'll see that we're cutting a clean path through it. But we also want to work with the idea of tolerance and giving a little bit of gap to the whole body as well. So what we can see is, if we can select this body, we can see that it's traveling perfectly through the center, which is exactly what we want. It might be a little close to the top there, but that's okay. We'll just ignore the problem and it'll go away for now. So then what we want to do is just run a caudal fillet along here, and we can just go like 0.2, see what that looks like. These might take a while as well to calculate because it's quite complicated following around all these shapes. Okay, so that's much too small, so let's go 0.5. And we want to use a caudal fillet so the distance between the lines stays, well, so the lines stay parallel to each other. That'll make it easier to thicken. So yeah, something like that. Let that do its thing. Then I'm going to hit save because Fusion's really in a crashing mood today. Sometimes it just likes doing that. And then what we want to do is thicken on this body against our main body. So we can thicken it as a new body and then use the combine feature. However, this should run a bit quicker. So we just need to go thicken, select this, and you know what, I will hide it and do it as a new body just so it's actually doing it as two separate operations. We want to do it symmetrically, so it's pushing away from the fillets and then into them. And we can just go like 0.2 and see what comes up. If the other body was showing, it would try and calculate it as a cut at the same time, and it might take a lot longer, or it might just crash. So sometimes it is good to split them up. And we can see that 0.2 mil, it looks like it's going 0.2 in both directions, so it's actually way too large of a tolerance. So 0.05 maybe. It doesn't really matter right now, we just want to get something in there. So let's let it do that, and we'll use this to split our main body in half. Whenever it gets around to it, there it is. We'll hit OK. And we can check this to, you know, again, it's always good to use these analysis with the section views, especially, you know, when we're talking about keeping a consistent section throughout the whole part. So show that, turn on our section view, have a look, and we can see we've got this nice sort of part here. It would probably be better to have these lips, the radius should probably be a little bit smaller, a little bit sharper of a radius on that, but that's not really a big deal. So then it's just a matter of saving, just in case, and going to modify, combine, select the target body, the tool body, we'll turn it to a cut, and when that figures it out, we'll just let it run. I find I try and use the combine feature a whole bunch in Fusion because it's really quite a powerful feature. It can get a lot done that you don't often see working well in other programs. And so here now we've got this really nice uniform cut, and we can come back in and change some of these dimensions if we want to make the tolerances tighter or looser. And we've got it coming all the way around, and it looks quite good, quite neat. One thing we want to check for is that these faces are a regular sort of width. So if we were to mix our plane up, our cutting plane, and it was at a large angle, like cutting across this at a weird angle, we would see that the distance from here to here would be a lot different from the distance from here to here. And we just want to make sure it's relatively consistent throughout the cut. Otherwise you're not cutting perpendicular to the body. So yeah, something like that works really well for cutting it up. Then you might want to run a really small fillet on this edge. So in terms of rendering, we're going to be looking at getting like our part line showing. So we know that rendering up our part lines makes it look much more like a product and much more professional. So when we come into here, we turn on in Canvas Render, and we can see there's a very slight lip in there. We actually want to come back and maybe make it a bit more noticeable. Sometimes you might find on the real products that the lips are really small, but this is one of those things where for the design purpose, we want to show off our skills. We want to show off we know how to model in a lip and a groove and all that. So the more noticeable you make some of these things, it can actually be beneficial instead of trying to make the cleanest, smoothest surface ever. You want to show that you've considered those elements in the design. doesn't look like that's working, so let's just go 0.2. It's probably too large and was running into the other elements. So something small. Chord length, again, you want that really consistent light. So yeah, even that does look a bit large, but I'm going to live with that right now. And once that finishes calculating it and applying it, we can then go and have a look at how it looks like in the renderer. And we can already see it's a bit more noticeable. We turn on the renderer, or in Canvas Render. I might just throw a gloss color onto that. Down to paint, gloss. Yeah, gloss red. Gloss yellow, why not? So we can see that it gets this really cool part line between them. And that type of shading, the ambient occlusion is really good to see. Maybe we'll find that, it's a nice little McDonald's controller, we'll find that this is a little wonky and we have to go in and make that smoother. But there's really no big deal there. It's all split up really well, and then showing like a section view or a render that has this part showing can be really impressive, because it looks like it's designed to actually snap together, which it is at this point. So I'm just going to show that and go ahead and make these a little less gross. So we've got that. Our product is now, our controller is now split nicely in half. We want to look at implementing other parts of the design. So I'm just going to roll this fillet forward, which should round that out. And we'll just blend this back in again nicely, seeing as it doesn't want to crash anymore. Hopefully. Nice caudal fillet there. And I'll see if it can do one on top without killing it. It cannot. Okay, so a constant radius works because it can blend that together a bit better. Let's just go, can we get away with 0.5 on that? Nope, 0.25. Okay, so it's going to be a very sharp edge on that. Well, somewhat sharp, but we'll live with that. So what we want to look at is how do we put a button on this type of surface? Our best reference at this point is to go to our Steam controller and open it up and have a look. We want to look at how we make buttons, how they make buttons. Let's just ignore that. And what we have to do to actually bring one into our thing, model it up right, and make it look real and, you know, to some point manufacturable. So we've got the buttons here. First thing we want to do is just hide that main body. And we can also get a good idea of the PCB at this point. So these aren't super long. The PCB should roughly be in the middle of the controller as well. And that's important to note. So right now we're going to be looking at the buttons and the thumbstick. So let's have a look at one of these buttons at the moment. Let's go with the X button, because why not? So we can just open up buttons, come down to button X and right click it and go isolate. That's going to allow us to see just the X button. And if we open this up, we can see it's made up of a couple little bodies. It's got this it's got this inner section, and it's got some markings on the inside, which are neat. And it's got an outer section which sits over it. I mentioned this briefly. I can't remember if it was in the introduction video or one of the other ones. Generally, the way it works is the inner body is colored. So this will be a solid color, this whole section. It'll be injection molded in a color, and that snap fits into this, which will generally be, you know, like it'll be like a gloss black or gray. And so no matter how much your finger or thumb wears down this, you're not going to lose the color. The plastics on both of these are going to wear down at an equal rate. And we are talking, you know, minuscule amounts, but over the years of using controller, you still want those buttons to be nice and crisp. So pretty much looking at this, what we have to do is create some sort of cylinder, a cylinder within it that has an X extruded out, and this one has to match the bottom one. So we can do something like export this out into its own thing and have a look at it there. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. What we can do is select our button. If we go to right click, we can export it. And what that's going to allow us to do is save it into our controller, game controller. Oh, no. So it does want to go in Advanced CAD, Steam controller, game. Another part that's really important to look at here will be the thumb pad, or the thumbstick, sorry. So it's got this weird knurling on the top. I would probably avoid using that. We can grab this as well, so we take the base. That's just a body, so we do actually have to export the actual part. So we select it, export, Steam controller, thumb top, sure, just go OK. That's going to take a second again. Okay, so having a look at our buttons, we can see that it's got the inner and outer part. This one's gone quite transparent. I'm not sure why, but that doesn't really matter. And we just got to remember that it travels down into the body of the controller. It only protrudes out from the top a little bit. Hopefully turning on cases will show us exactly what that's kind of like. Okay, doesn't matter. So we've had a look at our button. We know that it's got this sort of cross section going on where there's an inner and an outer component. So we can go ahead and model that up on our pad. And because we used a flat surface here, what we can do is just start off with a sketch right on this face, and maybe we want to fit nicely here. We'll have like 5 buttons down here or something ridiculous. It doesn't really matter. So we can go and create a line across here. We'll use that as our reference for finding the midpoint or the center point. Sometimes arcs like to pick up easy, sometimes they're a bit complicated. From here we set a dimension of 10 mil seems good, maybe a bit too big, but whatever. And this is going to be the maximum size of our button. We want to extrude it. We want to make sure we're extruding it directly up and down. Okay, so what we want to do is extrude this directly upwards. Unfortunately, Fusion is, well, a little wonky in that regard. So it doesn't allow us to select a direction to extrude along like something like SolidWorks might. So either we could have our buttons at an angle, or we could figure out how to extrude it directly downwards. So we're just going to have a look. Maybe we can use an axis to help us. So what have we got? Axis perpendicular to face at a point. No, that's going to be the exact same thing. We can go construct axis perpendicular at a point, through a cone, axis through 2 points, axis through an edge. So there's not a lot of options here. Like you would like one that was through from a point and directly up. And maybe we can just create one by creating a sketch. Doesn't matter where we select it. If we turn on 3D sketch, and if we select line, we can go from here. And from here, if we go on, say, like the right plane, it allows us to do that. We hit OK, and it actually comes up with that sort of green line, which shows us it's on that axis. So we can just hit finish there, and that's going to allow us to extrude this straight up. We could do other things. We could just go straight from and sketch on the original front plane. So we could sketch down here and then position our sphere, our cylinder, circle thing, and extrude downwards like that. So there's different ways of doing stuff. If we wanted it to start there exactly, we could do it with that line. So yeah, what I'm trying to get across here is there's a bunch of different ways to do these things. Some make more sense than others. Fusion wasn't designed in mind with coming from SolidWorks. It was designed from the ground up differently. So you kind of got to assume that not everything's going to be the same. So what we might do is just recreate that sketch. So we will project, unless we can just project that point. And just go OK, which we can, which is great. And we can create a circle. I think I just removed it from my toolbar. Go across here, dimension that to about 10. Yep, and what we're going to do is just go straight down. And we want to make sure we're making a new body. Select it. Okay, it's still going to change when it hits the next body. We just want to ensure that we're working with a new body here, and we can go ahead and do, we can turn on a section analysis. That's not really going to help us because it's not in the right spot. So what we might do here is change our visual style to wireframe, and we just want to make sure that it goes down somewhere where we might actually have our PCB. So we can go down further and trim it up later, that's fine. And we'll go back to our normal visual style. We just didn't want it poking out the bottom, which I have managed to avoid. Then if we want to actually trim this up to match the surface, we can come in and offset this and trim it with that plane. Right now I'm actually, I guess I'll do that. So surface, offset. It's not going to let us select just that, is it? Let's just turn off chain selection. We'll pull it up to somewhere where we want it. So we only want our button to come out, a couple of millimeters from the surface. So something like 3 mil is probably fine, maybe a bit too much still. It looks quite bulky. So let's just go, maybe just 2.5. Not a big difference, but whatever. So we do that. We can then split our body. Split our body with the splitting tool. Get rid of this top section. You could probably just use trim or something like that as well. So now our button kind of matches up the direction of our surface with the top, but it's still extruding straight up, which is fine. We can, put a fillet on here to actually round it down. Maybe we want it straight once it gets to the top. If we go to chord length, it actually evens it out a bit again. I find that chord length's pretty useful. And we can actually go under the surface here a bit to make sure it's rounded all the way. So 4.15 should do it, like that. And then what we want to look at doing is starting to split this up. So we know that we're going to have a second body in here, and that's going to have a button extruded through it. So what we have to do then is create an offset of our main body. Now this stuff doesn't have to be perfect at all. It can be quite close, or you can offset this on its own and split it up later. So, we can just go offset, and for some reason it really wants to bring that top in, even though I've got chain selection off. So let's just go where the outer one is still relatively thick. So -1.5. We can have a look. Yeah, that's fine. What we probably want is to make sure the bottom here is flat. Like across here, we probably want it to be flat. So what we can do is show our main body, and we'll create an offset of this face at 0. Again, change selection. Just the face, please. No. It's enjoying being frustrating, unfortunately. I can select this one and bring it back down, but I'm not quite sure why it just didn't let me pick that, so that doesn't matter. We can go -2.2, something like that. That's just going to flatten out this one a bit more. And using the trim tool, we can delete it without having to remove it later. Oh, sorry, we can just trim it away because it's a surface. And then what we can do is, if we patch that, that's going to give us a flat surface we can actually sketch on, which will be super useful for pushing up our letters through. So what we want to do then is stitch these two components together, or these two surfaces together. So we've got this little shape here. Then what we can actually do now is split this solid cylinder, and we can just go split body, splitting tools, and that's going to allow us to separate them. So we might want to turn on extend so it just shows up through the bottom, make sure we get a proper split. Now that we've got this top surface we can sketch on, we're going to get the same sort of problem in terms of the direction. Now I'm thinking about it, so what we can actually do is sketch on the bottom of this and go all the way through it. So it's a bit annoying actually. Let's go from the front. I think we're upside down. But essentially what we want to do now is pick a letter that we can place on here and extrude up. So we want to create text. What is a number or letter thing we can put? Our text will be, where is it? Unless it was putting it below it, so let's just try that again. Text. Yes, 10 millimeters. Okay, there we go. So now that's working. What's a weird letter that isn't on a thing? Okay, we can use the U, which is not used in any controller that I'm aware of, and we can just change the number down, or yeah, so we can just make it like 6 mil, position it, you know, I'm sure you'll be a bit more careful in the way you position it and make it look awesome. You can obviously change the font to whatever you'd want at this point. And then it's just a matter of solid extrude. Profile we want is that text. What it's going to do is cut through it. We want to change that to join, so it joins our body, or we can change it to split, new body, because we're going to merge it to the other one, to this in a minute anyway. And we want to show this. So what we can do is our extent can be to object, and if we select this object, okay, we can see it goes up to the face. Ideally what it should have done, if we turn on that, has that worked? I can't really tell. Yeah, so it looks like it's gone just up to the face, which is what we want. We can offset it like a tiny bit, not by 1, but 0.1. No, okay, so it still doesn't like it. It's been very painful and frustrating, unfortunately. Okay, that might work by going there. Even if it's slightly less than that, like 0.02 of a mil. Something really thin and slim, it's going to just show up a little bit more in our renders, which will be pretty cool. So we hit OK. It's given us a new body, because right now everything seems to be a little bit more painful than it should be. So what we can do is just show that, hide that inner body, and what we can do is use this body to split this one. So body to split here, splitting tool there. We don't need to extend it. And we just want to get rid of this little section here. So right now we've got this big body here. It's hollow. Let me turn off this little surface. So we can see we've got the part that has the cutout. We've got the body that sits inside it. And now finally, we can add some color to it to make it show properly as it should, as a button on the surface, right? So that's how we get our U button. Now that obviously looks a little too big now. that I think about it. So I can just go into wherever we originally sketched and extruded this thing up. And oops, I think that was just our font. We can go back to here. Is that not it? All right. Okay, it's all the way back here now. So that uses that. Right click, edit. Let's just change that to like 8. All right, so that's looking much better. We've finally got our U key. The fillet on the top is a little large. It shouldn't be that round or probably sticking out, but it doesn't really matter. Again, this is just a really sort of rough demonstration. As I'm sure you can tell, it's definitely a little rough in some areas. And we can hide that. We don't really need that anymore. And then when we hide our body, we can see that... Oh, sorry, I didn't join these two together yet. So what we want to do is combine this to this. We want to join them. We don't want to keep the tools. Okay, so now we've got this, which sits inside it. This should probably be a little bit larger, just get rid of these areas, but that's fine. As long as that all looks mostly right, we're good. If we want now, we can look at just mocking up a PCB or something that would control everything. On this controller where it's all bent up and wonky, we might find that's going to be a bit tough. So what we'll have to do is find a nice actual section where we can get a big enough PCB that actually makes sense. So what we can do is go section analysis from the front. And what we can do is just bring it down. So at this point, we can have something that fills in this sort of area. And so we might just do that. We know that's about, so if I come about 30 mil from this top plane, I know I'll be set. So top, we'll just construct an offset plane, 30 mil down here. And I will create a sketch on this plane. And even turning on the section view will kind of help here. And we can make it quite rough. Obviously, you probably want it symmetrical. And we can just go. If you click and drag, it brings out a straight curve section. And maybe it'll even come down here for when we put a rumble section in. It doesn't like doing that in that direction, so what we'll do is press escape, delete that off, and we'll come out straight here. Still doesn't like doing that. So then we'll just create our own arc because we don't need to use their arc, we can use our own. Something like that. Something like that. Join these up. We just want to be sure that we're getting like some good relations here as well. So we turn on tangent, make sure that's tangent. Make sure that's tangent, and then we can say that's a good base for our PCB. We'll make this a construction line. We will mirror it. So you can double click to select a group. Do that. That should then go solid again. And now we know where our PCB is going to be. We can extrude it up by about 1 mil or 2. Let's say we go 2 mil. Just go new body. It does look quite thick, but that's okay. Generally, you want to make sure these are thicker rather than thinner, just for realism's sake. and we might find that we get an issue up here where this might collide, so we can always go back and adjust that and have a look from the other view. So it looks like it's going to clear it quite fine actually. Maybe we'll just put a fillet on that outside edge. So yeah, we can say this is where our PCB is going to sit, which is good. Hide our section view, and just to double check again, we'll have a look on the bottom. Yeah, that looks fine, and we can just actually go around and round these edges. So they would be probably not have sharp edges like this on an actual PCB. Generally everything is rounded out a little bit. Just go through and quickly select all those. 2 mil. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's say that's where our PCB is. One of the problems is our button's currently touching there, so we can even just go really quickly, combine, target body, that, and then we want to cut. The tool body is going to be this. Then we can just run the same command again. Target body. I didn't keep the tool body because I pressed the wrong button. So we just want to make sure we keep it. So we can do this later on to just clear out everything below this line. If we don't like, because you know that's just right now how we can check it. But otherwise, what we can just do really simply is to show this, hide our top body here. Pardon me, and you know, there's a couple dodgy ways you can do it, which are always kind of fun, of just creating a plane on this surface. You could even dimension it for bonus points. Then it's just a matter of extruding it down, and it'll cut anything that is below that. So then when you turn your PCB on, it matches. That's fine for now, right? In terms of PCB and functionality and visualizing it, I'm not too fussed. If we want to get a joystick in, it's a similar sort of idea. We have our Steam controller in the workshop. Let's have a look. What we want to do is turn off that isolation, find our thumbstick. Let's isolate that. And we want to export. Save to Project Cloud. I think this is what I was having issues with earlier. It's been saving it to my desktop. We can save it to the cloud in Fusion Files, Game, Steam Controller, or just go Game Controller. Hit OK. Yeah. And here we can see it's trying to save it out or save something out. That might take a second. Alright, so now we're back here. We can open up this, well, for some reason it called it Game Controller, but it's a thumbstick. We probably don't want that top grip, we want to make our own. And we can also, you know, it's got these little bits for overmolding and stuff. We can also play around with it. I don't like how thick that looks, so I can just go press pull it in a little. So it's always fun to play around with it like that. Sure, I'll say I'm happy there. And what we want to do is bring this into our actual thing we're working on. So I'll just get the Steam controller out of the way. Over here, what we want to do is drag that in, or we could right click and insert it. It's just saving, and then it's going to load it up. So now we've got it loaded in. We can do a few things to play around and actually position it properly. First, we want to allow us to rotate it. For some reason, it's not giving us the proper rotate command. There we go. So we can just punch in 90 if we want to make sure it's 90 degrees, or when we want, we can angle it down slightly like that. We can roughly position it too. Whoops. There are ways of actually getting it really neatly in position using move commands and like the point to point. So sometimes you can get it to select one point and the other like that, and it joins them up. We still have to actually play around with rotating, so we can set the pivot point of the object around there. That'll allow us to rotate it around that actual spot. We can push it in somewhere, wherever makes sense actually, based on your design and thoughts. It doesn't really matter. And with that located in position, what we can do is start to actually punch out our cutouts for this. So again, sometimes it's easier to work with a section view turned on. So I can bring it across here, and we can see that we want it to kind of cut out around somewhere here. What we might be able to do is use this face. So select the face. Okay, turning chain selection off and on, managed to fix that issue I was having. That doesn't make sense, but whatever. And what we can do is something like, we go 1 mil off here. I'll turn off section view and hide that body. What we can actually do is thicken this, create thicken, because we just want to make sure that it's going all the way through where we want it to. Actually make it quite large, it doesn't matter. And we can press pull it to make it bigger, then do something like add a chamfer to make it a bit tidier. So just having a look on the actual body we're modifying, where it's gone. We want it to come out far, but we also want it to be at a slight angle, possibly inwards actually. So we can do something like that, and then if we isolate, we can look at putting a chamfer across it. So something like that. Maybe not equal distant. Maybe we'll go 2 distances and we'll change how far that comes out. Chamfers can be really good to play with. And we just want to find our body again. And we can then go modify, combine, target body. I think we're seeing a lot of this and getting used to the fact that we're going to be cutting out a lot. So this gives us that nice shape here. When we see our joystick, joystick is down here, we can see that it gets, well, that's probably way too big. But that is because our whole surface here is too large. So what I would probably do is bring all of this in tighter. Maybe I'd even bring this in first and model around it. We can go back to that offset and edit that to like 1. It might make it look a bit better, but the idea of this being like a super large area is a bit wasteful. So you probably want it nice and tight around there. Maybe you want to move this. Oops. up more to fill it out, however you want it to look. And then you should actually go in and model a sort of softer looking thumb pad than the one that it came with. But that's one way of getting that in there. Alright, so one other thing we want to look at while we're here as well is how to put in like a trigger or a shoulder button, as they're otherwise called. What I've done is just modeled one up because they're a little finicky to get the shape right, but this is a nice wide one. The idea behind a trigger is that it's actually able to rock in place a bit. If I do that, they're meant to, oh, that just looks weird. They're meant to be able to tilt down. So we want to make sure there's a little bit of clearance around them when we actually cut them out. But to try and simulate that and the joining and all that, it's actually quite complex. So we can kind of avoid that for now. To cut something like this out, you would just model it up in place, or you could always split a face and sketch and do something like that as well. But for this case, I've actually just made it a complex 3D form. Then you want to simply offset it outwards. So here what I've done is just offset it by 0.2 mil. Maybe you'll do it a little tighter, doesn't really matter. And from there, it's a matter of splitting the actual controller underneath it with that newly offset surface. So we've got this body here. We can now hide that or remove it. And the same for the bottom section, which is split as well. So we just need to pretty much hide or remove whatever that is. And now we've got a thumbstick that fits in quite nicely. If we hide the top, we can see how it has that little bit of tolerance around it, so that's all good. The other thing to do with something like this, it might have an indented button. So one way we can add that in, because what we want to do, an indented button, a bit of text on it. What we want to do with that is project it onto the face. The problem is our face is, well, quite complex. So in order to do that, we need to create a plane in the right position. Now I've got this modeled up here, but I'll just go and do another one. From the top view or any other view, you just want to get it, well, sort of right where it's following in between, in the middle, like that. From there, what we actually can do is move this in 3 dimensions. So we can close that, go move. Sketch objects, and pull that down into place. So we can do this by checking on the plane that it's kind of in the correct location, or something like that. Maybe we want it tilted up from the front and pushed down from in there, so it's following almost directly into it. So yeah, we can actually modify our sketches in 3D space. So this allows us to then create a plane along a path. So we select our path, and we can see now that that plane is colliding pretty well. It's a little off, so we can go in and move that some more. Well, actually, sorry, what we want to do is, oh yeah, it updates as well, so that's good too. So yeah, we can just move it some more, and then it's just a matter of creating a sketch on that face. So if I just roll forward a little bit on that plane, sorry, let me just hide this new one. And then we are able to create a sketch. Mine was a little bit further back, it doesn't really matter, where I've just hit R2 and I was able to project that to that face using an extrude. Opening up the extrude, the way I had it set up is to go extent to object. So we could go distance, and that just starts pulling it along in a direction. But if we go to object, select the object, we then get the option of setting an offset. So then we can just go wherever it hits here, it's going to go 0.2 mil further in, so negative. hit OK. And there we have a pretty decently etched in button identifying sort of label or whatever you want to call it. The only other thing that we really need to think about at the moment is how do we connect the top and the bottom of these two halves, right? So there's the groove, but generally there would be a a screw or, well, multiple screws holding them all together. So we want to find these big areas and add in what you might call like standoffs or posts throughout it that a screw can go into on one end and bite into the other side of it. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can go from the front, draw up just a circle, and it doesn't have to be very large. It can be, something like 5mm might be plenty. When we extrude it, we just want to go from pretty much one side to the other. So we can go from object, pull it down, and go start, extent to object as well. Select the outside. We don't want it to cut. We don't want it to really join at the moment either. We can just go new body. Okay, it doesn't actually like going up to that, so we can just go distance. It doesn't really matter. And we can pull it through. So what that's done is put a post right in the middle. Then what we'll want to do with that is split it, and that'll allow us to have one half connected to this and the other half connected over here. Generally, you would find a split on something like this would be flat. It wouldn't be following the contour of the body, so we're not going to use our fancy non-linear plane. We're just going to create a sketch on the side, and that allows us to come down and split it. It doesn't have to be exact or anything like that. It just has to be roughly halfway. And from there we can just go modify split body, select the body to split, splitting tool. That's going to go all the way through, and that's going to be good for there. Now, these will always have some sort of taper or draft angle to them, so we can include that. Let's just focus on, say, the bottom one, because it is the more complex one at this point. So what we can look at doing is just adding a chamfer. If we just go to modify chamfer, and we can go two distances. Generally, you'd want to set this with a like a proper angle or something like that. So you can go distance and angle, but it doesn't really matter. It is just to visualize it. So two distances, we can bring that in, and this is just to ensure it doesn't get stuck in the mold as it's injected. So something like that would be plenty, as long as it comes out past here. Then we can go ahead and punch a hole right through the middle for, say, like a screw. When it comes to actually using a screw, what we should do is find one on McMaster-Carr and import one from there. So we can look up specific screws. I will leave that up to you. Sometimes this doesn't always like finding the middle, which can be a bit annoying. So we can just go like that. And hope, no, it's not even going to let us pick a tangency. Can we project the surface using P and just maybe offset it inwards? We can do that. So we just want something that's going to allow us to put our screw through, and it doesn't give us a diameter down here because it's not quite straight, so we can just check it. Yeah, 1.4 mil is probably fine on that. Again, doesn't really have to be perfect at this point. but we do want it to go through both of these. So we can then go and extrude just that center section all the way through both, or just go two sides, extent all, objects to cut. We actually do want to just cut through everything here. Alright, didn't select all there. We do want it to go through everything, but we want it to maybe not go all the way through here, just because you know, the screw goes into here and this stays on the actual controller, it doesn't punch through the front. So maybe we only got it going in a little bit like that. We might as well throw our chamfer on there. So just to double check the distance, that was like, let's go 0.75. This just allows you to make sure your chamfer is going in the same direction. You can actually, you should be able to select a second edge as well, but sometimes it doesn't really like it because the distances are different. So if we go modify chamfer, and that will be 0.75, and this one will just go up towards the end. So they're both tapered, but they come towards the middle and join. And what we want to do is obviously make this to this surface here, and we're going to have to add in a sort of counter ball as well. What that is if we go to our wireframe, our screw head needs to actually sit on something. So our screw's got to come in through here and then sit up on a face over here. So that's pretty easy enough. We can just go to our front plane, create a sketch. Yep. We want to project one of these rounder faces, so probably even just that, and offset. And even if it's something like that, you know, maybe this whole thing should have been a bit bigger. Doesn't really matter. Right now it's purely for visualization. And we can turn this back on now. Probably shaded with visible edges. Extrude. We just select, well, we can select both, it doesn't really matter. And what we just want to make sure is our start can be from object, and we offset by 3 mil, maybe the other way. I'll just go -2, that'll be fine. Then we actually pull it out like that. As you can see, that's starting to get a bit close there, so we probably want it to be somewhat different. A little bit wider overall, probably a thinner wall thickness, but we'll just live with that. And here we can see, if I bring in our favorite section view, where is it? We get somewhere where our screw can sit in. It can thread in down into here and here, pull them together. Maybe this one would be opened up slightly more, just so that it does all the threading onto this one. So what you want to do is just select, press pull, grab that, go out a tiny bit, like that, and then that way the thread only bites into the bottom piece, or something like that. So we want to show our main bodies wherever they are. I have failed to label mine well. I've also still got my section view on. So let's have a look. There we go, there's one. So we just want to clear that back end off. That can be easy enough by just going split body, body to split, that bottom one. Splitting tool will be that face. You don't need to extend. We can just remove this rear section now. Now we've got this. What we want to do is, we want to go back to our extrude now, where we cut out that center post, and objects to cut, we can just make sure this body's selected as well. And now that's cut out nicely all the way through on a relatively flat part of the controller, which is pretty good. So modify, combine, turn it from cut to join. We don't need to keep the tool, and we just go OK. And there's one of our standoffs ready. The front part is simple enough. This just has to be joined together because it's on the inside. So modify, combine, that and that, join, no need to keep the tool. And if we turn on our section view, we can see that we now have these two like this, stood off in the middle, that it can now sort of help pull the controller towards each other, towards the two sides with. So you should have these, you know, at least one for each sort of thing here, maybe one here, maybe one in the middle. Generally these are also filleted a little bit on the back side, just so it doesn't feel too uncomfortable, probably not too, maybe like 0.2, or something like that. So I would actually start designing this from the screw first, so find a nice screw that looks right and is the right size, and you can bring that in using McMaster-Carr, put it into place, model everything around it if you want. But that's going to help add a real level of realism to your work when we go ahead and make this look a bit more real with proper lighting and stuff, and well, obviously materials to make it look like a proper PCB. So there's a lot of crashes in this sort of tutorial today, and a couple bit of hiccups that hopefully I've fixed up a bit with the editing. In class tomorrow or today, whenever you see this, we'll go over as much of this as possible as well, just to clear some things up. But yeah, so thanks for watching.